Welcome to the Intelligence Amplifiers, podcast that celebrates the people who make the intelligence a collective superpower. In every episode, we uncover the stories of learning and development leaders who amplify knowledge, break down silos, and empower teams to thrive. These are the enablers of insight, the ones turning expertise into action and shaping the future of work by ensuring that the right knowledge reaches the right people at the right time. So, if you're ready to explore how the intelligence is amplified and shared across organizations, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Hello. Today we have Kristin Trujeque on the show, and we're going to talk about her leadership and development path. And Kristin is these days at Amazon. But I really wanted to start with your earlier career. So if I remember correctly, you wanted something totally different coming out of college.
Yeah. Well, I started it back in Boston. So I'm from the East Coast. I'm an East Coast gal to start with. When I first went to school, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. So I was a communications major when I first started. Clearly, I think the only thing that still connects to that today is that I talk a lot, but clearly not the path that my career went down. Completely different arena, completely different life. But yeah, that's where I started.
I'm curious, what was about sports broadcasting that got you attracted to that?
So I grew up in a sports family, right? So I have only brothers. I only have, all my cousins are boys. So I just grew up in a family that was nonstop playing sports. I played sports through college. I played field hockey, played softball. We were the family that went to spring training all the time. So it was just, I don't know, it was always part of my life. But I'm old enough, I might be aging myself here, that we listened to baseball on the radio. So we would sit down as a family and listen to Nesson on the radio. So AM 1400, Rem Dog on the radio specifically. And it was just one of those things as a kid that I just recalled always doing. I wanted to be a bat boy for the Red Sox, but turns out that's actually a lot of the athletes' kids, not actually a real job that you can have. So I realized that was an actual job, as you could be a sports announcer. I just loved it. I love bringing people together. I love being able to hear the passion behind people. I love that there's somebody on the radio. I was never watching a game. I'd be in the car or wherever we were, and I could see what was happening. I love people's ability to just tell stories and bring everything to life. And it was just something that was so amazing to me. I just loved the idea of that. And I wanted to do that for other people. And I love sports. It was just such a passion around where we were. There's never a time that we didn't have sports playing or going on. One of the big things we did in our family was go buy baseball cards. We all opened the baseball cards together and stuff like that. So it just surrounded my life. And I don't know, there's something about the way that it brought people together and the stories that came from it and the way that it sparked your imagination that I loved it.
Yeah, that's you mentioned that twice, bringing people together. So that's what resonated for me as well. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
And obviously, so that was a childhood dream, but then you ended up going, I believe, to a business school or doing something totally different. How did that happen?
Yeah. So I don't know, it was probably my sophomore year, something around that, that I realized pretty quickly that to be a sports broadcaster, you'd have to go, broadcast at high schools and colleges. I was under this assumption that I was just going to automatically, be an announcer for the Red Sox. Turns out that's not how that works out. I would have settled for the Celtics, but also not how that was going to work out. So kind of just figured out what my path was. What did I have the most credits for as a business degree? Didn't really know what my path was going to be at that point. So I got my business degree. I moved out to Washington at that point, Washington State. So I transferred schools. I started working at a bank at that point. So I worked through a few different banks, actually. Graduated and didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life at that point. I was kind of spent a year or so after college just working, feeling out what was next. Wasn't sure if I wanted to go to grad school at that point. Wasn't really sure if I wanted to keep working at the bank. Thought maybe that would be a career that I'd stick around with. And I actually ended up joining the military then. So I joined the Air Force after I finished undergrad. I enlisted instead of commissioning because I really wanted to get on this path once I got there. In high school, I'd worked for a long time at assisted living. So I worked at assisted living home for about 8 years. And I had a passion for it. I really enjoyed it, but I didn't know that if it would be something that I want to get into. So I ended up going into the military, into the medical field. I went back to grad school. So I ended up getting a dual degree. I got a master's in business and then a master's in healthcare administration. So I did a dual degree program while I was in the military then, thinking maybe I would, get out of the military, spend my 4 years there, get out of the military, go into the medical field, change the world there. Turns out I didn't like the civilian side of the medical world that much. Turns out I didn't do my 4 years in the military like I thought I was going to. I've now been in for 15 years. So I think my life just kind of took a lot of turns at that point. But yeah, after I finished my business degree, went and continued with education, but in a totally different sector than I thought I was going to. Never thought I was going to join the military. So that was another jump that I wasn't expecting then too.
So lots of curiosity and lots of, there's also the sense of like wanting to help people, like make a contribution, be of service. That's what I'm also hearing in all this. Was there anything else about military that kind of attracted you specifically to that, or Air Force?
It's kind of a joke. I feel like there's always a lot of people who have like these really great patriotic reasons. I did come up from a family that, I had some members in the military. My family worked for the VA. My aunt retired out of the Air Force. So I had some connections to it, but I didn't necessarily feel super passionate. Kind of a joke. I went to buy a new computer for grad school and there was a recruiting station next door. And next thing I knew, I was like, oh, I guess I'm in the military now. So there wasn't one thing that necessarily was a huge passion with that. But I did find that I love the mentorship that comes with it. I love being able, kind of like you said, I like bringing people together. I love bringing people along this journey. And I thought I'd spend my few years there and then, get my education benefits, learn something, meet some new people, travel around. What I found from it is that it wasn't necessarily the Air Force itself. It wasn't just the military or the branch specifically. It was just the camaraderie, the community. It was the people and us learning together, going through some of the kind of the crappiest parts of your life transparently with other people who are also embracing these same things. There's something about being in the military with other people that just understand the uniqueness that you can't quite explain in other places. And so again, it's that bringing people together, that coming together. And now that I've been in for such a long time, it's like there's a saying, it's just you embrace the suck. We all get to embrace that suck together and continue to move forward. And as I've gotten older and grown up in the military, I think that continues. It changes, but it continues. And so as much as, the military has its ups and downs, just like everywhere, every job in the world does, just that bringing people together, that coming together over shared experiences is such an amazing thing.
Yeah. I totally agree. There's something about shared embracing the suck together, and bring it all together. So there's no better bonding moments, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot. So I sense a lot of curiosity and like kind of courage to kind of poke around and try different fields and explore and see what you resonate with. And I really admire that. I'm curious, how did you end up in learning and development? Like, what brought you into that field specifically?
Yeah, I feel I'll sometimes joke that it was everybody who's in learning and development of any sort got there in an accident.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think that there's always sort of an underlying passion. There's always an underlying curiosity, like you're saying. But I think for me, it's always been, I really love helping people to uncover what they don't know is there. And it's something I've always been really good at. So from a career perspective, like I mentioned, I'd worked in banking, I'd worked in finance, I'd worked through, Washington Mutual, Key Bank, Chase Bank. I'd had a career there. I moved into mortgage at the mortgage company that I worked for. Really unique place. Started there when we had about 30 people. Grew a lot in that organization. I think when I left, excuse me, we'd scaled so much. I don't even know how many employees we had, probably about 2,000 or so. So it was a really cool opportunity to do things that I'd never done before. Moved around a few different places with that. But as we scaled, it was a realization that we really needed learning and development there. But I'd also been doing it in the military. So from an education perspective, I've been working in the military, building development programs for specifically medical competencies. So doing credentialing, doing what we call readiness in the military. So I oversaw readiness programs, ensuring that we were getting people through various exercises and making sure that they were ready to go out the door for whatever missions were needed. I still do that today in the military, but at a much larger scale. So I started doing it there in the military. When I worked at Chase Bank, I was a trainer there. Just in the branch, I started training managers and assistant managers, then started training through the Washington and Oregon regions as we were building branches. And then when I went to the mortgage company and we needed to stand up that department, I just sort of organically went into that department and started leading it and owning it. So like that's where like the career kind of officially started on paper, like where I started putting it more on my resume. But I think that all of my careers really had a layer of helping people to learn, helping people to really uncover those unique things that they do, really helping with the mentoring part. And something for me is I distinguish training from development. That's something that I really feel strongly about, is that I'm not necessarily a trainer, and I don't know that I've ever been a trainer, but I'm somebody who develops people, is being able to, hear what makes them tick, see those superpowers, really understand like you're good at this. And there are ways that you can take this and make that something that's a career. You can take that and pivot where you are today and make that something that's really exciting and unique for you. So I think that I've always been somebody who can help develop somebody, not necessarily somebody who helps train them. So it's something I just have kind of been doing, but officially on paper, that's really where it started. And I've really never looked back from that. Even, when I changed careers a little bit, my path changed. I moved out of the finance, banking, mortgage side and moved over to the technology side. At that point, I'd started my PhD. So I have my doctorates in education specifically, but I have it in organizational development. And I was the only person in my program who wasn't in a formal education setting. So I really had this idea that, again, education, development, training are different things, but it was a really unique perspective that allowed me to get this whole unique, 360 view, what it looks like to learn. And so, yeah, I don't know. I've always had that curiosity that I wanted to keep seeing what it looked like to develop people.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, you made a distinction between training and development. And I remember I had a coach at one point, and he gave me this analogy of like a cup of water, right? So training was filling that cup, right? Like you don't know something, you just fill it with the nuggets you don't know, and suddenly you know it, right? Development is about expanding the cup. It's making the cup much bigger, as opposed to just, dropping nuggets of knowledge into it. And I thought it was really powerful to kind of think about, like, how do we transform our capacity? How do we, it's not just incrementally adding, but it's transforming. And so development is transformational in nature. So I really, that resonated with me. I also heard how you mentioned this kind of like out and about path of falling into that and like following your passion, but not necessarily knowing that your career was in learning and development, and that's also interesting. You also talked about the mortgage company, and I happen to know the company, and the founder is one of my dearest friends, Darius, and
Hey,
you also mentioned how you saw it from 30 people to 2,000 people. So that's 2 orders of magnitude. That's a rocket ship in terms of growth. And mortgage is not the most sexiest industry, and definitely not known for the culture. But knowing Darius and knowing his story, he wrote a book on culture.
Yep.
And he was really proud of what he had created there. And like, he talked a lot about the employee net promoter score, and the quality of how much he invested in people. And you had the front row seat into that whole thing. What was it all about?
I sure did. I mean, Darius and I literally shared an office for a very long time. If he ever watches this, I hope he remembers the fact that he would steal my pens. So I started buying banker pens, the ones that had the metal on it, and I'd stick those to his desk so that he wouldn't steal my pens anymore. But no, it was such an awesome company to work for, and it was such a weird time in my life. Without diving into a ton of things, it was another one of those times in life where it's like I was leaving one career, diving into something. I had quite literally quit my job at Chase, got into a U-Haul, and drove to California. And I was driving to my interview with Darius. At the time, it was Endeavor America, but later the Money Source. I had no idea if I was getting this job or not. It was like an interview that I set up, and I was like, maybe I'll get it, maybe I won't. We'll see what happens. No job set up, and I was just like, we'll see what happens. Because I am very much one of those people that I'm just like, it'll work out. Something will happen. No big deal. And Darius and I had like the most interesting interview where we're both I feel like we were kind of like pushing each other's buttons to see who was going to like back down first on different things. And I think that was one thing that I really appreciated with Darius as a human being is we pushed each other a lot at times. We could call each other out on things, but we could also be really honest with each other about what was good, what was not good, but we could laugh and joke. But I also appreciated that, like, yes, even at that organization, things change, right? As we grew, organizations change. You can't always scale the exact same way. I had a lot of fun working there. I also got to try things that I had no idea what I was doing. And at the end of the day, it might not have been perfect, but like Darius trusted me to do it. He's like, you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. Which also just created a sense of like, I can figure a lot of things out, even if I don't know what I'm doing. So I think there were a lot of people who grew up in that organization who figured out what they wanted to be or what they wanted to do. I had a lot of people who came into that org, and Darius loved doing the Gallup Strengths Finders when people first started there, which was a huge part of how he built the foundations of just the culture and organization there. And people would come in, they'd be like, actually, I don't want to be a processor. I don't want to be an underwriter or whatever it was that they were coming into. And there was a lot of like, okay, so what do you want to do? And one of the really cool parts is like, we encourage people to find what do they like? What can they do? And if there was room for that at the organization, like, let's find a role for that. Obviously, that didn't work in every scenario, but that was such a cool piece of just being, again, in that development space versus that training space is like, yeah, I can teach you how to be an underwriter. I can teach you how to do X, Y, and Z. But what do you want to do? What are your passions? And that was like, it was just a really cool part about working at that organization. Obviously, as we grew, things changed a little bit. And like, we put our toes into different aspects of mortgage. Like you said, it is not a sexy industry whatsoever. I don't know if any part of banking is ever, but it was still a really fun place to be. And for good, bad, or ugly, no matter what, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to work there because I know things that I would never have any business learning whatsoever about like putting down Cat 6 lines across the country in building offices and stuff that I'm like, yeah, of course I know about that. Why wouldn't I? Made it really hard to write a resume. I will put that out there though, really hard because I was like, what didn't I do? What didn't I? So yeah, it was cool. It was a good opportunity.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so you stumble upon learning and development by kind of out and about, and after that you ended up at Target, right? With working with the executive team. How was that? How was retail different or the same?
Yeah, so that was an interesting one. So I mean, it's interesting because retail banking and retail are very similar in a lot of ways, more so than I would have thought. So in banking, I worked in retail banking, I worked in private client banking, I worked in a lot of different segments of it. I worked in operations, but retail banking and actual retail are very similar in so many facets that I was not expecting that because I had, other than, a little bit in high school or whatnot, I never really worked in retail before. And I will say that Target has a really great framework and foundation of what they're trying to do. I don't know that the operating model was necessarily my favorite one that I've worked in. What I realized is just, and I say this as somebody who works for one of the, biggest organizations in the world right now, but at scale, it was really hard, I think, at an operating level within, each one of the stores or the districts to keep up as much of that development piece that I really wanted to. and that felt challenging to me just as a human being to actually feel fulfilled with that particular role. So I actually didn't stay there for a very long time. I wanted to in some ways because I know that there are some amazing things that they do, but I actually didn't feel like I was being honest with myself in that particular environment. Yeah.
So speaking of that, one of the largest organizations in the world, so you ended up at Amazon.
Yeah.
Now in tech finally. How is tech? What was surprising about being in a tech company, and especially one of the largest and fastest growing ones?
Yeah. So before I came to Amazon, I had another stop for about 4 years at a different tech company. And I feel like I've worked in some like fintech before, so I've stepped in and out a little bit. But that was my last company was my first like true tech. And I was so just like blown away by the work that we were doing and just amazed by the minds that I worked with. And I think that was the first thing that I was like awestruck by, just in general, is the wealth of knowledge around me in terms of like, I have a PhD, right? But I don't consider myself to be like an overly smart person. I'm a hardworking person, but not necessarily the smartest person in the room. I could sit down in a room of the people that I was around. I was like, how do your brains function? You are so intelligent. And has just always been something that I am so amazed by. And the amount that I can learn just by sitting down and talking to someone. Again, being one of those curious people, I'm like, tell me more. So just initially, like that is something that always has attracted me about tech is there's always something new to be learned. There's always something new to be discovered. And that's really, really just fun for me. But Amazon is wild. I don't know how else to put this. Just in terms of scale and size and just the capacity and bandwidth and so much here. I work at the corporate headquarters. I work in Seattle. First of all, if you're in Seattle at some point and you're walking around any of like the South Lake Union area, you're probably in an Amazon building and don't even know it. The buildings are like just so embedded into this city that you often are in them. And they're not like, they don't have big Amazon banners or anything like that. They're just kind of like quiet buildings. They're big and you go and you're like, oh, I'm in a coffee shop. No, you're not. You're in an Amazon building. But it's a really unique space. And I always struggle thinking like, what's next in my career? And so I work in change management pretty frequently. So I'm a change practitioner and I really love this aspect, working with, executive leaders in different aspects of like, how do you navigate change through the organization? So really, to me, this is still a developmental piece. Like, how do we navigate the change cycle? How do we actually get people on board and go through this process together? But I always am thinking like, what's next? What's going to come for me? Whether it's at Amazon or somewhere else. But I have a hard time fathoming leaving. Is fathoming a word? Either way, we're going with it. It is today. But I have a hard time ever considering leaving tech. I don't know where else I could go that I truly think that I could be surrounded by such amazing minds and such amazing opportunities to just innovate and be creative. I don't know that exists anywhere else. So I don't know, that's something that continues to just inspire me on a regular basis, is just stepping in a room and being like, here's the problem we have. How do we solve it? I don't know that that's somewhere outside of tech. I just don't know.
Got it. And we briefly talked about the value set, right? The culture. You just mentioned the mindset and then ultimately the skill set, right? So it seems like skills is something that you can teach people, but it's the mindset that is really interesting in the context of the right value set. So what about the mindset of people at Amazon or tech people? Like, what are you noticing there? What's the common thread?
Yeah. So I'll be very transparent right now. It's a hard time, I think, at Amazon in general. There is a very stark difference of the before and after. And what I mean by that is that there was the Amazon of, the Jeff Bezos Amazon and the Andy Jassy Amazon. And there's not a right or wrong. I don't mean it that way. But there are people who were accustomed to the way that one leader led versus how another leader led. we're also going through this challenging time of Amazon had the first layoffs that they've ever had in the last few years. We're in that point that there's a forced return to office that is not the norm. So right now, culturally, it is challenging for a lot of people at Amazon. So that, I think, is just, it's a unique place to answer this question from, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at here. But I think overall, the thing that attracts people to Amazon overall, and the thing that keeps people going, is this premise of being innovative, this premise of being able to create and uncover no matter what you're doing. So it doesn't matter if you're in a tech-driven role. It doesn't matter if you are a human resources business partner. It doesn't matter if you are, somebody who works, we have like recording studios next door. It doesn't matter what your role is. They continually push you to be creative and innovative in what you're doing, to find unique solutions that maybe somebody else didn't think of. And that's something that I just don't see other places. I've never experienced in other places. Like, well, yes, we hear and we're like, yeah, let's come up with a new solution. I think Amazon is a place that happens no matter which version of Amazon that you've been in. And right now, maybe there's a little bit more of some resistance or hesitancy because of the last few years being different than other years at Amazon. I still believe that is the foundation, the core of, where Amazon started and where they continue to drive to, is regardless of your role, regardless of what you're doing, innovation and being able to really continue to sort of pick your adventure in where you go at Amazon is really, really amazing. And like, just to expand on that a little bit, part of why I even say this is, if you're familiar with the interview process at Amazon, it's really unique. So, you apply and I don't even know how many people apply for particular roles, but it's really challenging to get into Amazon. You get your interviews, you go through the recruiter, then you work with the hiring manager, and then you go through something called a loop. And the loop is like 8 hours straight of interviewing. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. It's usually 8 one-hour interviews back to back with a little break in the middle. You go through people who know your team, as well as what we call bar raisers. So people who are, ancillary to your team. So they kind of know some of the work that you do, but they're people who are trying to identify if you culturally fit within Amazon's leadership principles. So it's a really challenging process. And I always talk about this because that gets you through the door. Like, that shows that you are smart enough, you have the skill set, you have the capabilities, you have the competencies to do the job. Once you're through the door, it's kind of like it's wide open for you. If I wanted to go do a completely different job that I have no skill set in, one, Amazon has tons of internal training, true training, not just development. There are lots of development opportunities, but training that I can go, if I wanted to go turn and be like, I want to go be a product manager, I could go do a lot of product management training and go into that, because those interviews to start with allow you to have a core and common competency set that every Amazonian has walking through the door. We know that at this level, every Amazonian has this. From there, we can develop you here, we can train you here, we can expand that cup, we can add, droplets into that cup. So it's kind of a pick your own adventure when you get here. So you get to be innovative, you get to do things that you've never been able to do before. And I truly do believe like Amazon pushes you to do that, to continue to explore things. Like I said, like, I don't care if you're an HRBP, you want to go be a product manager, you want to go learn how to be an SDE or an SDM, there are paths to do that. And that's, again, just not something that you can always do at other organizations. But the scale in which Amazon does business and the ways in which they set up foundational competencies for every Amazonian is just really, really unique. And it drives people to want to be here. And it just keeps people coming. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. They say the culture comes from the top, but innovation comes from the bottom, right? The grassroots. And it seems like you filter people for that curiosity, for that hunger to keep exploring and developing themselves and being curious, and so forth. And the one thing I'm also hearing is that there's a lot of sort of autonomy and freedom and opportunities to develop and try different things and so forth. We actually had somebody from Microsoft that was leading their engineering leadership and development share their lessons learned, and it was something very similar, right? So giving them autonomy, but also equipping them with the right opportunities, so that they have time and place and space to explore all that. Any common threads for the leaders that you notice at Amazon versus other places, comparison to just individual contributors?
Yeah. Interestingly, I actually just wrapped up a big research project over the last 9 months that has to do with exactly that. Is like what makes leaders at Amazon different. And obviously, you can look at leadership research studies across the world, and they aren't necessarily significantly different from one another, but there are a handful of things that really stood out to me, at least. And a few of them were really just fun, but some of them were really just like, that makes sense. So one thing that we talk about at Amazon a lot are mechanisms. And you may, if you know Amazon well enough, there's the idea that Amazon has some peculiar things, and mechanisms are essentially processes, but they're very specific in the way that they're done. But one of the things that came up is that like mechanisms that exist are not just, micromanaging things, but they are things that are in place that allow us to do the right things for the customers all the time. And this means something as unique as like somebody who works in, say, Alexa, for example, that every one of those leaders understands the unboxing experience, meaning they sit down and unbox an Alexa from start to finish, setting it up so they know exactly what it feels like to be a customer setting up Alexa for the first time, so they can understand, like, what does it feel like to pull off this sticker? What does it feel like to plug that into the wall and try to connect it to my Wi-Fi or whatever that might be? So they create mechanisms that allow them to understand the unique experiences of customers. So that's one thing, but that's very tactical. One of the huge things that comes up is storytelling. Leaders who are able to empathetically and authentically tell stories, good or bad, it doesn't matter, are leaders that people are willing to follow. They are humanized in ways that allow them to feel like, I can make a mistake as an employee. I can, take a risk and know that I'll still be trusted. And all of this truly comes from people being able to tell stories of times that, like, I messed this up, or this happened, or this is my experience in X, Y, and Z before. And to me, that is so just an amazing thing. And I'll say this too. When I wrote my dissertation, a huge aspect of it was about digital narratives too. And like, how do we share this? Storytelling is such a thread in all of us as human beings, right? Like, that is how we've passed down cultures for our entire existence as creatures. So the fact that it's still so inherently important to us in the way that we look at leaders in terms of our confidence and comfort to fail, to innovate, to create, and to feel successful relies so heavily in a leader's ability to tell stories that make us feel safe, to make us feel like they can empathize with us, to make us feel confident, is really, really, really interesting. And I don't necessarily know that that's unique just to Amazon, but I do believe that the structure of Amazon requires our leaders to be really good storytellers. And I think that comes down to like what you just said about Microsoft too, is that they require a certain level of competency to exist, but they also give you the opportunities. They give you the structures that help you to practice, to become better storytellers, to understand, like, how do I use visualization to make sure that this mistake that happened, we can share that in a way that allows people to go, okay, I understand that this happened, and I feel safe that if I made that mistake or something similar, here's how I navigate through it. So it's a really interesting piece that I find that resonates with a lot of people, but that storytelling piece really, really stands out.
Yeah. I mean, I often say I believe that the difference between why humans are the dominant species on this planet is storytelling.
Yeah.
We're the only creature able to pass knowledge from generation to generation through storytelling. It started by, sitting with the elders around the fire in a cave, wherever, right?
Yeah.
And then we digitalized it and moved it to different mediums. But
Exactly.
no, other animals can communicate, but they can't tell stories. There's no sense of timeline.
Exactly.
Uh,
There's a difference. Well, and I think about it too, and contextually with the military as well. Like I think about the first wars or whatnot. Obviously there's more to it than that, but simple at its simplest nature is like you have to convince somebody to be like, yes, we're going to go fight with other people. There's a really good chance that you're going to die, but it's a great idea. Follow me. And you have to be able to tell a really compelling story to get people to get behind you and like stand up and be like, I want to do that. I'm going to follow you anywhere that you go. And what does it come down to? It's not like there's a huge, unique leadership set of skills, but it's the ability to tell stories that allows people to want to follow you and makes people want to follow you. And, Simon Sinek obviously talks a lot about this in a lot of his books and talks and things like that. But it is such a unique thing. I fully agree with what you're saying. I get really excited about it too, because again, in my own research, there's a whole bunch of neuroscience around it too, and just the ways that it elicits emotions in us as well.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I joined Twitter, and you talked about, I joined the peacetime Twitter, and then it became a wartime, company
Yeah,
post.
yeah.
And we started bleeding talent. All timers were leaving the company, and with that, we were losing a lot of institutional knowledge. So I was leading Twitter University, and one of the initiatives we had was creating a series called War Stories. And the idea was to have old timers, people who've been there for a while, stand up and share the worst moments of the Twitter history, but do it in such a way that is fun, blameless, with a lot of vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And it was pretty magical. We would have engineers stand up and share how they accidentally took entire Twitter down.
Yes.
Right? The whole site was down. And if you kind of think about it, this is a super embarrassing moment. You would never just go around and talk about this. But we created this podium, which was hey, let's tell war stories, and capture them. And through that, there was this sort of blameless sharing of what happened. And through that, a lot of learning.
Yeah.
And it was one of the highly appreciated programs.
I love that.
It's combining that storytelling with opportunity to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And kind of having the institutional knowledge be spread that way around, the campfire, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
No, I love that.
Yeah. So you mentioned how this was a research that you did, and obviously it sounds like you have a lot of curiosity around organizational development and what makes leaders great and so forth. What's on the horizon for you? What are you excited about next?
Gosh, I don't know. That's I will say this. I think right now I'm really excited about some of the stuff in my own military career. I mentioned I come to these parts in my life that it's they're kind of those big pivotal moments, right? We all have those. And right now I'm okay, I'm pretty steady in where I am at Amazon right now. I don't see any big transitions happening there for the next year or so. I like the things that I'm doing. I'm comfortable in the projects and programs. I'm not ready to jump into something new. Here I've been at Amazon now for about 3 years. And I changed teams probably a year ago into slightly different role, which I enjoy. But right now, we're going through a big transition in the military. Everybody above me is retiring. I'm suddenly at that age. I don't feel like I'm old enough for this. I still look around the room and be like, so who's in charge? Turns out it's me. And I'm when did that happen? So I'm getting ready to have a lot of people above me retire. And that leaves me and a couple of who I feel like are kids who retired. I'm sorry, not retired, who joined with me, who we grew up together. But the military not the military, the Air Force just implemented a program. It started this year, and it's now essentially what they're calling rebluing, but it's going back to a lot of really foundational leadership development principles. So it's kind of right up my alley, right? of how do we get back to leadership competencies as, non-commissioned officers, senior non-commissioned officers, and getting people through, like, how do we present ourselves as a strong, unified military? And, some people have their own feelings about this one way or another. So for me, like, I oversee this program for the wing, which means like I have oversight for the development, all of the airmen who are coming through that program for the rest of my career, foreseeably. So at least the next 5 years that I'm in the Air Force, that's when I can retire in 5 years. So for the next 5 years, I really think about the fact that, like, I have a big role in developing hundreds of the airmen, the next generation of the Air Force. And while this is like a pre-curated curriculum for a lot of it, I am going to be the person like talking them through this. I'm going to be sharing the experiences that I had. I'll have peers obviously facilitating and doing parts of this with me, but we're going to be sharing those stories. We're going to be sharing that knowledge of like what kind of like your war stories. Like, what do we do? What do we mess up along the way? What do we do really well along the way? What do we wish what we did differently? Like, how do we mentor people, or how do we wish that we'd been mentored? Whatever that might look like. And so that really starts for me actually in about 2 months. Like, that's the official launch. That's when I dive in. That's when people retire. And like, I am on my own basically on this. And I'm really excited about it. But I'm also really excited, sort of nervous about the fact that I'm just looking at all these little young faces across the Air Force. Like, and it's an interesting one to think about. And without diving too far into certain things, kind of like Amazon, there's the before and the now. Those of us who have been in for a while, we remember the wartime tempo of 2003 to 2007, 8, where you were gone, your friends were gone, you had people you cared about, hurt, injured, dying, like really a lot. A lot of people in the military today, they never had that experience, nor do I want them to. Like, I don't want them to have that, but it's a very different mindset of people. But I also want them to be ready and prepared for if that ever happens, and realizing like the impact that myself and others myself managing the entire program, but myself and my peers teaching people this is like, it's a big impact on a lot of people. And again, really like molding the shape of the Air Force and the future of a lot of the military in a lot of ways. So it's not necessarily Amazon. It's not tech necessarily. It's a totally different, pivot there. But that's something that's pretty interesting for me. And we'll see how that one goes. And then I'll pop back over here and see. Oh, I'll still be at Amazon, obviously, in the meantime for that one. And see what comes next with Amazon. I'm curious to see how the next couple years will look with the landscape of the now at Amazon, returning to the office, and seeing how things normalize over the next few months, few years. I foresee that, we're going to have a year or two of just flux. People are going to feel like they're getting adjusted. And I think we'll finally get back into a place that like we're back to the norm of what Amazon feels like. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. And again, what do these leaders of the next generation of Amazon look like? We have a lot of people who are growing into their careers right now. We've had a lot of transitions the last couple years. And so I'm really excited to see, like, without saying too many things, new adventures that are going to be popping up, and see how those grow and being able to be part of that and participate in some of those. So, yeah.
That's pretty awesome. On one hand, you're responsible for the next generation of leaders at Amazon. On the other hand, you're responsible for the next generation of airmen at the Air Force. I would say that's a pretty huge impact you have on the world. So kudos to you for that. I'm curious, if you, looking back at your career, what would you give as an advice to your younger self, or somebody who's just entering learning and development and cares about developing, pulling best out of people? Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Gosh, it's kind of a hard one. I think there's two things, and I'm going to frame them a little differently. Is I think the first part is just overall learning and development, training, however you want to put it, is learning to say no quicker. just in general. And the reason behind that is I think L&D becomes sometimes a bucket of where people don't know where to put certain things, and they go, well, maybe that's a development opportunity. Maybe that's a learning thing. Let's put it over there. And that bucket gets really full really fast. And being able to distinguish really quickly between what is training, what's not training, what is development, what's not development, and making that clear. I wish that I'd known that sooner so that I could identify like what were the right things for me to be leaning into. I think I said yes to a lot of things that I shouldn't have really quickly, just for the opportunity to learn. And while I don't think it's bad for us to have the opportunity to learn, it probably took me a lot longer to get to certain places. And not that it's all about speed, don't get me wrong. But then you get boxed into certain things that you don't necessarily need to be doing that are probably outside of a learning and development or a leadership development silo. But I think the big thing is just like listening, learning. As learning professionals, we know a lot, or I should say we know a little about a lot, more often than not. I mean, you often are people who have sat into the rooms and heard what's going on. You know a little bit about everybody's jobs. Like you're somebody who can pick little things out. So it's easy to jump into solutions of what you think might be best. And I just think being able to really sit back, especially if you're new in career, new in role, or new in an organization, whatever that might be, and really just take the opportunity to learn the person, learn the business, learn like what do they want out of their lives. I think more often than I can count, there have been people who are in a career that wasn't even the career they wanted to be in. It's just like, they're like, this is where I was and I kept going, but I don't really want to do this. And how do you figure out how to help them pivot? How do you help them figure out where to go next? And that takes really, really spending some time getting to learn who they are, what they need, where they're going. But that just takes some time to just listen, authentically listen and understand instead of trying to find a solution right away.
Got it. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kristin. This was quite a journey through your career, and I know it kind of took different paths, and a lot of curiosity, a lot of care for developing others. I appreciate you sharing that. So
yeah, of course.
With us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode of the Intelligence Amplifiers. If you like what you've heard, be sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss out on the future episodes. And if you're interested in being a guest or have a question, check out the episode description for how to reach us. Also, don't forget to check out PlusPlus, the platform that makes collective intelligence at scale possible. Find out more at plusplus.co. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep amplifying.